There's a moment in Sarah Mitchell's life where everything changes. Not gradually, not over time, but in one single, terrifying second. And it all starts with a glass of water. But before I tell you about that moment, you need to understand something about Sarah. You need to understand what it feels like to be so tired that your bones ache. To work 16-hour days and still not have enough. To watch someone you love slowly dying because you can't afford to save them. That was Sarah's life. She was 26 years old, working double shifts at Bellissimo, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants. The kind of place where a single bottle of wine costs more than her monthly rent. Where rich people came to be seen, to make deals, to show off their wealth while she smiled and nodded and pretended their problems mattered. But Sarah had real problems. Her younger sister, Lily, was 19 and dying. A rare neurological condition that caused seizures, memory loss, and slowly, cruelly was taking her away. The experimental treatment that could save her cost $50,000. Money Sarah didn't have. Money she would never have. So she worked, and worked, and worked, for hours of sleep a night for 3 months straight. Her manager, Richard, breathing down her neck every second. Her feet screaming in pain. Her hands shaking from exhaustion. But she kept going because that's what you do when someone you love is counting on you. And then came that Friday night. Richard was sweating through his expensive suit, snapping his fingers at Sarah like she was a dog. Table 4 needs to be cleared now. And fix your apron. You look like you've been running a marathon. Sarah wanted to laugh. She had been running a marathon. For 3 months. Yes, Mr. Richard, she whispered, pushing a strand of dark hair behind her ear. But then Richard grabbed her arm. Hard. His fingers digging into her skin. And his voice dropped to a hiss. Listen to me very carefully. The VIPs just walked in. That is Dominic Castellano. He owns half the buildings in Manhattan. If you breathe too loudly near him, you're fired. Do you understand me? He is notoriously difficult. Sarah glanced toward the entrance. And there he was. Dominic Castellano looked like he'd been carved from marble. Sharp jawline. Dark eyes that could cut through steel. A charcoal suit that probably cost more than everything Sarah owned combined. He walked like a man who'd never been told no in his entire life. But it wasn't Dominic that caught Sarah's attention. It was the woman beside him. An elderly lady, frail and trembling, clutching his arm like it was the only thing keeping her standing. She wore a black veil and a heavy coat that seemed too big for her small frame. But it was her eyes that broke Sarah's heart. She looked absolutely terrified, like she was trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. I understand, Sarah said quietly. I'll be invisible. She wasn't supposed to take the VIP table. That was always Claude's job. But Claude was currently in the alley having a panic attack, which meant Sarah was the only one left who could handle it without dropping a tray. So she grabbed a fresh pitcher of ice water, smoothed her uniform, and walked toward the table. Dominic was already seated, checking an expensive gold watch on his wrist. He didn't look up when Sarah approached. His mother, Francesca, was muttering to herself, wringing a napkin in her hands over and over. Sparkling or still? Sarah asked softly. Still, Dominic said without looking at her. No ice. And bring the wine list. The reserve list, not the one you give the tourists. Of course, sir. Sarah placed the crystal glasses down carefully. As she poured water for Francesca, the elderly woman suddenly jerked forward. Her hand struck the pitcher. Splash. Ice-cold water cascaded across the expensive tablecloth. It soaked the edge of Francesca's velvet coat. It splashed onto Dominic's polished shoes. The entire restaurant went silent. It was like someone had sucked all the oxygen out of the room. Dominic stood up so fast his chair screeched against the floor. Damn it, he roared, shaking water from his cuff. Are you incompetent? Sarah's heart dropped into her stomach. I'm so sorry, sir. She moved Anne. I don't blame my mother for your clumsiness. Dominic's voice carried to the back of the room. Other diners were staring. Some were smirking. Do you have any idea how much these shoes cost? Sir, please Richard was already sprinting across the floor, his face pale as a ghost. Mr. Castellano, I am so sorry. This will never. But then something happened that stopped everyone cold. Francesca began to cry. Not just tears. A full, heartbroken wail. She started hitting her own head with her palms, rocking back and forth, completely out of control. Mama basta, Dominic hissed, trying to grab her hands. He looked mortified. Stop it. You're making a scene. But Francesca pulled away, shouting in a language Sarah hadn't heard in years. It wasn't normal Italian. It was thicker, rougher, older. She was pointing at the spilled water, rambling about floods and lost papers, completely terrified. I said stop, Dominic snapped. His patience was gone. He looked at Richard. Get this incompetent girl out of my sight. And get my mother a sedative. Now! Richard grabbed Sarah's shoulder roughly. You're done, Sarah. Get out. Clock out and leave. Sarah felt tears pricking her eyes. She couldn't lose this job. Lily's surgery was in 3 weeks. Please, she whispered. It was an accident. But Francesca's wailing grew louder. She was hyperventilating, clawing at her throat like she couldn't breathe. Dominic looked helpless for the first time. Panicked. He was speaking smooth, modern Italian to her, but she wasn't hearing him. She couldn't hear him. And then Sarah understood. She knew that rhythm. That sound. That specific dialect. It wasn't just Italian. It was an ancient form of Tuscan from a tiny mountain village called Monteleone. A dialect almost nobody spoke anymore. The same dialect her grandmother used to sing to her before she died. Sarah stopped walking. She looked at the sobbing woman, at the terrified billionaire who had no idea how to help his own mother. And she made a choice. Ignoring Richard's grip, Sarah stepped forward. She dropped to her knees right beside Francesca. What do you think you're doing? Dominic barked. Get away from her. Sarah ignored him. She took Francesca's trembling hands in hers and looked her straight in the eye. And then, in perfect Monteleone dialect, Sarah whispered, Il sol non dimentica mai la luna, signora. The sun never forgets the moon, my lady. The room was deadly silent. Francesca froze. Her hands stopped shaking. She stared down at this young waitress in her cheap uniform, eyes wide with shock. Tu parli la lingua, Francesca whispered, her voice cracking. You speak the language of home. Sarah smiled. A genuine warm smile. Si. Non piangere. L'acqua lava via il dolore. Yes. Don't cry. The water washes away the pain. Francesca reached out with trembling fingers and touched Sarah's cheek. Tears were still streaming down her face, but she was calm now. Peaceful. She was looking at Sarah like she'd just seen a ghost. Dominic Castellano stood frozen. His mouth was slightly open. He looked from his mother, who was now gently stroking Sarah's face, to this waitress he'd just tried to destroy. He'd hired the best doctors in the world, the best specialists in Europe, and none of them could calm his mother when she had these episodes. And here was a waitress in New York, speaking a dialect from a tiny Italian village, doing the impossible. Who are you? Dominic whispered. The anger was gone, replaced by pure shock. Sarah stood up slowly, smoothing her skirt. She looked at Richard, then at Dominic. I'm just the clumsy waitress, sir, she said quietly. And I believe I was just fired. She turned to walk away, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst out of her chest. Wait! Dominic's voice wasn't a command this time. It was a plea. But Sarah didn't stop. She pushed through the double doors into the kitchen, her hands shaking uncontrollably now that the adrenaline was fading. Sarah. She spun around. It wasn't Dominic. It was Richard, looking like he was about to have a heart attack. Don't take another step, Richard panted. Mr. Castellano wants to see you. I'm clocked out, Richard, Sarah said, using his first name for the first time ever. You fired me. Remember? I didn't mean it, Richard lied, wiping sweat from his forehead. Look, the old lady, Francesca, she won't eat. She won't drink. She's asking for the girl with the voice. If you don't go back out there, Castellano is going to buy this building just to demolish it with me inside. Sarah hesitated. She thought of Lily in that hospital bed. She thought of the eviction notice sitting on her kitchen counter. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. Fine, she said. But I'm not waiting on him. I'm just helping her. When Sarah returned to the dining room, everything had changed. The other diners were pretending not to watch, but every ear was tuned to table 4. Dominic was standing by the chair looking uncomfortable, like a man who'd just realized he'd made a terrible mistake. When he saw Sarah, he actually pulled out a chair for her. A waitress, sitting at the VIP table. Please, Dominic said, his voice stiff. Sit. Sarah sat. Francesca immediately reached out and grabbed Sarah's hand, clutching it like a lifeline. She started murmuring in that old dialect, asking about olive trees and goats and harvests. Sarah played along. She invented stories about the village, using the vocabulary her grandmother had taught her years ago. For 20 minutes, Sarah fed spoonfuls of risotto to a billionaire's mother. calming her between bites, smiling at her, treating her like a human being. Dominic watched them like a hawk, analyzing every word. When Francesca finally fell asleep in her wheelchair, exhausted but peaceful, Dominic poured a glass of wine. He didn't pour it for himself. He pushed it toward Sarah. "Drink," he said. "It costs more than your monthly rent." Sarah ignored the wine. "Why did you call me back, Mr. Castellano? How do you know that dialect?" Dominic asked, his eyes narrowing. "That isn't Italian taught in schools. That's ancient Tuscan from the mountains near Monteleone. My mother hasn't heard anyone speak it since her sister died 30 years ago." Sarah stiffened. "My grandmother was from there," she said carefully. "She raised me." "What was her name?" Sarah hesitated. She knew her family history was complicated. Something about a scandal. A flight to America. Secrets her grandmother never fully explained. "Isabella," Sarah lied, using her middle name. Dominic studied her face for a long moment. "You have her eyes," he said quietly. "My mother's eyes." Sarah stood up. "I have work to do, Mr. Castellano." "No, you don't," Dominic said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a checkbook. "My mother has early-stage dementia. It's aggravated by stress and travel. We're in New York for 2 weeks for a business merger. I can't have her screaming in hotel lobbies." He uncapped a fountain pen. "I need a companion for her. Someone she trusts. Someone who speaks the language of her childhood." He looked at Sarah. "I'll pay you $10,000 for 2 weeks. All expenses paid. You'll stay in the penthouse suite with us." Sarah felt like she couldn't breathe. $10,000. That would cover half of Lily's surgery. It was a miracle. "But," Dominic added, his voice turning cold again, "there are rules. You don't speak to the press. You don't speak to me unless spoken to. And you do not, under any circumstances, think this makes us friends. You're a tool to keep my mother quiet. Do we have an agreement?" Sarah looked at his arrogant face. She hated him. She hated the way he looked at her like she was furniture he'd just purchased. But she looked at the sleeping old woman. And she thought of her sister. "Make it 15,000, Sarah said steadily. Dominic blinked. A corner of his mouth twitched. Almost a smile. But not quite. He wrote on the check. Ripped it out. Slid it across the table. 15,000, Dominic said. Be at the Waldorf Hotel tomorrow at 8 a.m. Don't be late. He stood up. And Miss Mitchell, if you spill anything on me again, I will ensure you never work in this city again. Sarah walked out of Bellissimo that night with a check for $15,000 in her pocket. She should have felt relieved, grateful, happy, but something was nagging at her. Something about that estate Francesca kept mentioning. The olive groves, the broken archway in the garden. When she got home to her tiny apartment, Sarah pulled out her grandmother's old Bible. The one thing she'd kept after her grandmother died. Tucked inside was a faded photograph. A young woman, beautiful and laughing, standing in front of a grand villa. Behind her was a garden with a distinctive feature, a broken stone archway. Sarah's blood ran cold. It was the same estate Francesca had described. Her grandmother hadn't just been from the same village as the Castellanos. Her grandmother had lived in that house. And if what Francesca said was true, if there had been a betrayal, a stolen inheritance, then Sarah Mitchell wasn't just a random waitress who happened to speak an old dialect. She was family. And Dominic Castellano was living a life that should have belonged to her. What Sarah doesn't know yet is that the truth is even more shocking than she imagined. And when she walks into that penthouse tomorrow morning, she's going to step into a web of secrets, lies, and betrayals that go back 50 years. The question is, will she survive it? When Sarah Mitchell walked into the Waldorf Hotel at 7:55 a.m. the next morning, she thought she knew what she was getting into. A simple job. 2 weeks of caring for an elderly woman. $15,000 to save her sister's life. She had no idea she was about to uncover a secret that would bring a billion-dollar empire to its knees. The penthouse suite was larger than Sarah's entire apartment building. 3 bedrooms. A library with floor-to-ceiling windows. A view of Central Park that looked like it belonged in a painting. Sarah stood in the marble entryway, clutching her small overnight bag, feeling completely out of place. "So, you're the hired help." Sarah turned. A tall, blonde woman stood in the doorway, looking Sarah up and down like she was examining a bug. She was stunning in a cold, calculated way. Expensive clothes. Perfect makeup. Diamond earrings that could probably pay for Lily's entire treatment. "I'm Sarah," she said quietly. "I'm here to help Mrs. Francesca." I'm Victoria Sterling, the woman said, stepping closer. Her perfume was overwhelming. I'm Dominic's fiancée. Of course she was. And let me make one thing very clear, Victoria continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. I know what you're doing. Sarah blinked. I'm sorry. The old country act. The dialect. It's a cute trick. Victoria's smile was sharp as a knife. But Dominic is vulnerable where his mother is concerned. If I find out you're trying to manipulate her to get a ring on your finger, I will destroy you. Sarah almost laughed. Miss Sterling, I need this money for my family. I have zero interest in a man who treats people like dirt, no matter how much money he has. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Good. Keep it that way. The first 3 days blurred together. Sarah spent every waking hour with Francesca. And when the old woman was calm, she was absolutely delightful. She told Sarah stories about a vineyard in Italy, about a young man named Antonio she'd loved before duty forced her to marry someone else, about the smell of jasmine in the summer and the taste of fresh figs. But she also talked about darker things. I stole it from her, Cara, Francesca would whisper during their afternoon tea, her eyes cloudy and distant. I stole the birthright, and now God punishes me by taking my mind. Stole what? Sarah would ask gently. The inheritance, the estate, everything. Francesca's hands would shake. My sister, my beautiful sister Julia. She fell in love with a poor American soldier. Papa was so angry. He disowned her, cast her out with nothing. Sarah's heart would pound every time Francesca mentioned that name. Julia. That was her grandmother's real name. And then what happened? Sarah would ask, her voice barely a whisper. Papa brought in a boy, an orphan from the church. He raised him as his own son to replace Julia. To hide the shame, Francesca's tears would fall. But the guilt eats me alive. I should have fought for her. I should have found her. Instead, I lived in her house, spent her money, pretended she never existed. Sarah would hold the old woman's hands and sing to her until she fell asleep. But every word felt like a puzzle piece clicking into place. Dominic was rarely around. He was always in meetings, negotiating his merger, building his empire. But every evening he would return to the suite, loosen his tie, and watch Sarah read to his mother. He never said much, just watched with those dark, intense eyes. On the fourth night, everything changed. A storm broke over New York. Thunder rattled the massive windows. Lightning split the sky. And Francesca woke up screaming. Sarah bolted from her bed, running down the hallway in just a t-shirt and sweatpants. She burst into Francesca's room. Dominic was already there, shirtless, trying to hold his mother down. Francesca was thrashing, burning with fever, her eyes wild with terror. She's burning up, Dominic shouted. Call the doctor. No, it's a panic attack, Sarah yelled back. Get out of the way. She climbed onto the bed and pulled the old woman into her arms. And then she started singing. A specific lullaby in that ancient dialect. About a fisherman and a star. About finding your way home in the darkness. Slowly, Francesca's screaming turned to sobbing. Then to silence. She fell asleep, gripping Sarah's shirt. Sarah looked up, breathless. Dominic was staring at her. Not with contempt. Not with suspicion. With something else entirely. He was close. Too close. She could smell sandalwood and rain on his skin. Could see the exhaustion in his eyes. The fear. The relief. You're good with her, Dominic said quietly. The arrogance was gone. She just needs to feel safe, Sarah whispered, using his first name without thinking. She carries a lot of guilt. Guilt about what? She talks about her sister. About a theft. Dominic stiffened. He pulled away. The wall came back up instantly. My mother is sick. She imagines things. Don't listen to the ramblings of a dying woman. It sounds real to her. That's enough, Dominic snapped. Go to bed. But as Sarah walked back to her room, she saw Dominic go into the library. He didn't turn on the lights. He just poured a drink and stood staring at a painting on the wall. A portrait of the Castellano family estate in Italy. Sarah paused in the hallway, and her heart stopped. She recognized that estate, not from a magazine, not from a tourist brochure, from a photograph her grandmother had kept in her Bible. The same broken archway, the same garden, the same house. Her grandmother hadn't just been from the same village. Her grandmother had lived there. If Francesca was talking about a betrayed sister, if that sister was Julia, then Sarah wasn't just some random waitress. She was a Castellano, and Dominic was living in a palace that should have been hers. The next morning, everything fell apart. Victoria Thorne had been busy. Digging. Investigating. Making phone calls. At breakfast, she threw a file onto the table in front of Dominic. "I told you she was a fraud," Victoria smiled, her teeth white and sharp. "Look at this." Dominic opened the file. His face went dark. "Is this true?" he asked coldly, holding up a paper. "Is your sister a convicted felon?" Sarah's blood turned to ice. "Lily got into a fight defending me 2 years ago," she said, her voice shaking. "She has a record, yes. But that has nothing to do with. And your debts." Dominic read from the paper. "You owe $50,000 in medical bills. You're desperate. I told you I needed the money." Sarah cried. "I never lied about that." "She's a liability," Victoria interjected smoothly. "A desperate woman with a criminal sister in the home of a billionaire. She's probably planning to kidnap Francesca for ransom." "That's a lie," Sarah shouted. Dominic looked at Sarah. The softness from the night before was completely gone. He was the CEO again. Cold. Ruthless. Calculating. "Pack your bags," Dominic said. "What?" "You heard me. The deal is off. I can't trust you. But your mother. I'll hire a nurse. A professional. Not a grifter." Sarah felt tears burning her cheeks. Not tears of sadness. Tears of rage. She looked at the painting of the estate one last time. "Fine," Sarah said, her voice shaking with fury. "I'll leave." She walked toward the door. Then she stopped, turned around, and threw the truth like a grenade. "Ask your mother about the ruby locket, Dominic. Ask her about Julia." Dominic froze. Every muscle in his body went rigid. "What did you say?" "My grandmother's name wasn't Isabella," Sarah said, her voice steady now. "It was Julia. And she died with nothing while you lived in a palace built on her birthright." She turned and walked out of the suite. Behind her, Dominic Castellano stood as still as a statue, the color draining from his face. Because Julia was the name of the aunt who had died 50 years ago. The aunt who was supposed to have inherited the family fortune before she mysteriously vanished. 6 hours later, Sarah sat in a plastic chair in the Mount Sinai waiting room, her knees pulled to her chest, staring at nothing. She'd thrown away $15,000. She'd walked away from the only chance to save Lily. And for what? Pride. Truth. "Miss Mitchell?" Dr. Oren stood there, clipboard in hand, his expression grave. "Is she okay?" Sarah scrambled to her feet. "Lily had another seizure. We stabilized her, but her condition is deteriorating faster than we anticipated." He paused. "The experimental treatment in Zurich. We need to book it now. Do you have the deposit?" Sarah felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. The check was in her pocket, but she'd walked out before finishing the job. If she cashed it, Dominic could sue her for fraud. Or worse, cancel it before it cleared. "I'm working on it," she whispered. "You have 48 hours, Sarah," the doctor said gently. "After that, the window closes." Meanwhile, at the Waldorf, Dominic sat in the library, a file open in front of him. Not the file Victoria had shown him. A different one. A private investigator's report he'd commissioned the moment Sarah walked out. An emergency deep dive into the Mitchell family history. The report was thin, but it contained one document that made his blood run cold. A birth certificate. Mother, Julia Castellano. Father, unknown. Place of birth, Brooklyn, New York, 1974. Dominic slammed the file shut. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the glittering skyline of Manhattan. "Julia," he whispered. Growing up, the name Julia had been forbidden in the Castellano household. His grandfather, the powerful Don Marco Castellano, had ordered it never to be spoken. Dominic was told his aunt had died of a fever when she was 18. But there were always whispers. Rumors among the staff that she'd run away with an American soldier. That she'd been disowned. Erased. If Sarah was Julia's granddaughter, she wasn't just a waitress. She was his second cousin. And she might own half of everything. "Dominic." Victoria stood in the doorway wearing a silk robe, champagne glass in hand. "Why are you still obsessing over that trash?" "I called security. If she tries to come back, they'll arrest her." Dominic turned slowly. For the first time, he saw Victoria not as his polished, perfect fiancée, but as something venomous. "You knew," Dominic said quietly. Victoria blinked. "Knew what?" "You investigated her background before today. You knew her grandmother's name was Julia. That's why you were so eager to get rid of her." Victoria took a sip of champagne, her eyes narrowing. "I was protecting your interests, darling. The merger with Ventura Holdings relies on the stability of the Castellano family trust. If a long-lost heir pops up, a waitress with a criminal sister, the stock price dives. I did what had to be done. She's family, Dominic said, his voice rising. She's a liability, Victoria snapped, slamming her glass down. And she's gone. Forget her. Dominic didn't answer. He grabbed his coat and walked past her. Where are you going? She demanded. To find the truth. Dominic didn't take his limousine. He took a taxi to Queens, to the address listed in the file. It was a rundown walk-up in Astoria, sandwiched between a laundromat and a bodega. The buzzer didn't work. The front door was propped open with a brick. Dominic climbed 4 flights of stairs, the smell of stale cooking oil and damp plaster filling his nose. He reached apartment 4B and knocked. No answer. He knocked again. Harder. She ain't there, buddy, a voice called. An elderly man poked his head out from across the hall. She's at the hospital. Her sister's bad. Which hospital? Mount Sinai. The kid's got that brain thing. Dominic turned and ran down the stairs. When he arrived at the hospital, he didn't need to ask for directions. He found Sarah in the cafeteria, sitting alone at a corner table, staring at a cold cup of coffee. She looked small, defeated, exhausted. Dominic approached the table. Sarah looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She didn't look surprised to see him. She looked too tired to care. Here to arrest me? She asked hoarsely. No. Dominic pulled out a chair and sat. I'm here to ask about the locket. Sarah laughed. A bitter, dry sound. The locket. That's what you care about. Not the fact that you threw me out on the street. I care about the truth, Sarah. Dominic leaned forward. After you left, my mother said something. Something lucid. She said, the key is in the heart of the lion. Sarah frowned. The Castellano family crest is a lion, Dominic continued. There's a stone lion in the garden of our estate in Italy. She says there's something hidden there. Something Julia left behind. He paused. If you're truly Julia's granddaughter, then half of that estate, half of everything, might legally belong to you. My grandfather's will was never found. We assumed he left it all to my father by default. But if there was another will... Sarah stared at him. I don't want your money, Dominic. I want to save my sister. That's it. I can do both, Dominic said quietly. He placed his hand on the table. Palm up. A peace offering. I've already wired the funds to the Zurich clinic. The helicopter is waiting to take Lily there tonight. Everything is paid for. Sarah stopped breathing. Tears welled up in her eyes and spilled over. Why? She whispered. Why would you do that? Because, Dominic said softly, if you're my blood, I treated you like an enemy. And in Italy, there's no sin greater than turning your back on family. He stood up. But I need proof. A DNA test. Tonight. If it's a match, you're coming to Italy with me. We're going to find what your grandmother hid. Sarah looked at his hand, then at his face. She saw the conflict in his eyes. The businessman fighting the man of honor. And if I'm not a match, she asked. Then the money for your sister is a gift, Dominic said. Consider it payment for the best waitress I ever fired. Slowly, Sarah reached out and took his hand. It was warm, firm, real. Okay, she said. Let's find the truth. 48 hours later. The private jet touched down in Tuscany just as the sun was setting, painting the Italian sky in bruised purples and burnt oranges. The DNA test had been conclusive. Sarah Mitchell was a Castellano. The revelation had shifted everything between them. On the flight over, Dominic hadn't treated her like a servant. But he hadn't treated her like family either. He watched her with fascination and wariness. She was a variable he couldn't control, a chaotic element in his perfectly ordered empire. And Victoria had insisted on coming, sitting across the aisle in oversized sunglasses, radiating hostility. Welcome to Italy, Dominic said as they landed. The land of sun and secrets. The drive to the estate took 2 hours through rugged mountains and olive groves. Finally, they turned onto a private gravel road lined with cypress trees. At the end stood the villa. It was magnificent. A golden stone palace, crumbling slightly at the edges, covered in ivy, standing on a cliff overlooking the Mediterranean. As the car stopped, the household staff lined up to greet them. An elderly woman in a black apron stood at the front. Maria, the housekeeper who'd served the family for 50 years. Sarah stepped out of the car. Maria gasped. She dropped the basket of lemons she was holding. They rolled across the gravel. Julia, Maria whispered, crossing herself. Santa Maria. Il fantasma e tornado. Holy Mary. The ghost has returned. Sarah stepped forward. No, I'm Sarah. Julia was my grandmother. Maria rushed forward and grabbed Sarah's face in her rough hands. Tears streamed down her wrinkled cheeks. The eyes. The same fire. She kissed Sarah's forehead. You have come home, Piccolina. You have finally come home. Dominic watched this with a tight jaw. He saw the way the other servants looked at Sarah. With reverence. Recognition. They knew the history he'd been denied. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. Her room, Julia's old room, was a time capsule. Dried flowers from 1970 on the vanity. Books of poetry. Sketches of dresses. It was the room of a girl full of dreams. A girl who'd been erased. Restless, Sarah put on her robe and wandered into the moonlit garden. In the center stood the fountain and the stone lion. It was massive, weather-beaten, water trickling from its mouth into a mossy basin. The key is in the heart of the lion. Sarah ran her hand over the rough stone. The lion's chest was solid. No keyhole. No hidden compartment. I checked it 10 years ago. Sarah jumped. Dominic stepped out from the shadows, smoking a cigarette. When I was a boy, I heard the stories too, he said, walking toward her. I thought it was pirate treasure. I climbed all over this thing. It's solid marble, Sarah. There's nothing inside. Your mother was sure. My mother sees things that aren't there. The tension between them was electric. They were two sides of the same coin. The prince and the pauper bound by blood. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the upper floor. Glass breaking. Then a scream. Mother! Dominic yelled. They bolted toward the house, sprinting up the marble staircase. Francesca's door was wide open. A vase lay shattered. She was sitting up in bed, pointing at the open balcony doors. Lo hanno preso, she screamed. He took it. He took the papers. Dominic rushed to the balcony. A dark figure was sprinting across the lawn toward the cliffs. Stay here, Dominic ordered. No way. Sarah grabbed a heavy brass candlestick. Dominic didn't argue. The intruder was fast, dressed in black tactical gear. Professional. He reached the old stone wall at the edge of the property and vaulted over it. Dominic reached the wall just as the figure disappeared into the olive grove. Damn it. Sarah caught up, breathless. Did you see who it was? No. But he knew exactly where to go. He wasn't there to hurt my mother. He was looking for something. Did he find it? Dominic turned back to the house. We need to check the wall. What wall? The one he jumped over. They moved closer. The moonlight hit the stones at a specific angle. Sarah noticed something. Dominic, look. She pointed to a stone near the top. It had a carving. Faint, worn by centuries, but visible. Not a lion. A heart. The heart of the lion, Sarah whispered. It's not the statue. It's the wall. The lion wall. Built by your ancestor, Leone Castellano. Dominic stared. My God. He grabbed a rock and smashed it against the carved stone. It sounded hollow. He hit it again. Harder. The mortar crumbled. With a grunt, he pried the stone loose. Behind it was a small, dark cavity. He reached inside. His hand closed around something cold. He pulled out an old rusted iron box. And sitting on top was a gold ruby locket. Sarah gasped. That's it. That's the locket from the photo. Dominic opened it. Inside was a tiny folded piece of parchment. But before he could read it, a blinding light flooded the garden. Drop it. 3 men stood at the edge of the olive grove, holding flashlights and guns. And stepping out from behind them, wearing a trench coat over silk pajamas, was Victoria. She was holding a phone. Good work, darling, Victoria said smoothly. I knew if I let you play detective long enough, you'd find it for me. She smiled. Now hand it over. The merger depends on that box never seeing the light of day. Dominic stepped in front of Sarah, shielding her. Victoria, you hired these men. Don't take it personally, Dominic, she said, checking her nails. Ventura Holdings pays better than you do. And they don't want a bastard heir claiming 50% of the assets. She looked at Sarah with contempt. Now give me the box. Or the waitress dies first. Sarah gripped the candlestick tighter. They were trapped. A cliff at their backs. 3 gunmen in front. But then Sarah noticed something Victoria didn't. The household staff, Maria, the gardener, the driver, were slowly emerging from the shadows, holding pitchforks, shovels, old hunting rifles. This was Italy. And in Italy, you don't touch the family. A large man with a thick mustache and a double-barreled shotgun stepped into the light. Giuseppe, the local baker. Signorina, Giuseppe said to Victoria, his voice like gravel. I suggest you put the toys away. The carabinieri are 20 minutes out. But my aim is much faster. The mercenaries looked around. They were outnumbered 50-1. One by one, they lowered their weapons. We didn't sign up for a war with locals, the lead mercenary grunted. He holstered his gun and backed away. What are you doing? Victoria shrieked. I paid you. Kill them. Your money isn't worth dying for, the man said. He turned and ran into the darkness, his team following. Victoria stood alone in the moonlight, her mask crumbling. Dominic walked up to her. He didn't yell, didn't strike her. He just looked at her with profound, terrifying disappointment. Get off my land, he whispered. Dominic, wait, Victoria grabbed his arm. I was testing you. The board pressured me. I did it for US. Dominic shook her off like dirt. Maria, he called. Escort Miss Sterling to the gate. If she returns, I cannot guarantee her safety. Victoria was dragged away, screaming. When she was gone, the villagers cheered. But Sarah didn't cheer. She was staring at the box in Dominic's hands. Open it, she said. Inside the villa library. Dominic placed the box on the desk. He pried the rusted latch. The lid popped open. Inside were 3 things. A deed to the Castellano Shipping Company, dated 1974. A last will and testament of Marco Castellano. And a sealed letter addressed to my son, Alessandro, Dominic's father. Dominic unfolded the will first. His eyes scanned the yellowed paper. He paled. What does it say? Sarah asked. It says. Dominic swallowed hard. It says he regretted casting Julia out. That upon his death, the estate was to be divided equally. 50% to Alessandro. 50% to Julia. Sarah let out a breath. So it's true. I'm an heir. Yes, Dominic said. He looked at her with strange sadness. You own half of everything. The company. The villa. The accounts. That's billions of dollars. I can save Lily. I can buy the hospital. You can buy Switzerland, Dominic murmured. He reached for the 3rd item. The sealed letter. Dominic, Sarah said gently. You don't have to read that now. I need to know. My father died never speaking of this. I need to know if he knew. He broke the seal. He read, and a single tear rolled down his cheek. He dropped the letter and walked to the window, turning his back. It's all yours, he said, his voice breaking. What? All of it. The money. The company. The name. He turned around, shattered. I have no claim to any of it. Sarah picked up the letter. It was in shaky handwriting. My dearest Alessandro, if you are reading this, I am gone. I cast out my daughter Julia because she loved a poor man. I replaced her with you. You have been a good son, but you must know the truth. You were not born of my wife. We adopted you from the orphanage after Julia left, to hide our shame. You are a Castellano by name, but not by blood. My blood flows only in Julia. If she or her children ever return, do what is right. Give them the birthright. Your father, Marco. Sarah dropped the letter. The room spun. Dominic wasn't her cousin. He wasn't a biological Castellano. He was an orphan brought in to fill the void her grandmother had left. I'm a fraud, Dominic said hollowly. I've been walking around like a king, judging people, firing people. And I'm nothing. Just an orphan in a stolen suit. He took off his signet ring and placed it on the desk. I'll have the lawyers draft the papers in the morning. I'll resign as CEO. It's all yours, Sarah. He walked toward the door. Stop, Sarah said. There's nothing to say. I said stop, Sarah yelled. She grabbed the deed and threw it at him. It hit his back and fluttered to the floor. Dominic turned, shocked. You think this piece of paper makes you family? Sarah demanded, tears streaming. You think DNA makes you a Castellano? It does in the eyes of the law. To hell with the law. Sarah marched up and poked him hard in the chest. Who sat by your mother's bed for 10 years while she lost her mind? You, who built the shipping company into an empire. You, who defended this house tonight. You. She picked up the ring from the desk. Took his hand. My grandmother Julia left. She chose love over this cold golden cage. And Marco, he was a bitter old man who tried to replace her. But he didn't just buy a replacement, Dominic. He raised a son. She pressed the ring back into his palm. Family isn't blood. Family is who stays. You stayed. She smiled through her tears. I don't want it all. I don't know how to run a shipping empire. I know how to balance 3 plates on one arm. If you leave, this family dies for real. Dominic looked at the ring. Then at Sarah. The walls finally crumbled. "What are you proposing?" he asked hoarsely. 50-50, Sarah said. "Partners. We run it together. You handle the boardrooms. I handle the people. And we take care of Francesca together." Dominic closed his hand over the ring. He looked at Sarah with an intensity that made her knees weak. "Partners," he agreed. And then he leaned in and kissed her. It was a kiss of relief, of passion, of two lost souls finally finding their anchor. 3 months later, the boardroom of Castellano Global in Manhattan was packed. The double doors swung open. Dominic walked in, sharper and more commanding than ever. But he wasn't alone. Walking beside him, wearing a tailored Navy power suit, was Sarah. She didn't look like a waitress anymore. She looked like a queen. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dominic began, "there have been rumors about the future of this company, about a lost heir, about legitimacy." He looked at Sarah. "The rumors are true. I'd like to introduce Sarah Castellano, my partner, my co-CEO, and my fiancé." The room erupted. Sarah smiled. "Thank you. We have a lot of work to do. But first, a few changes." She pointed to the back of the room. "Mr. Richard." Richard Henderson froze, holding a tray of canapés. "The waiters in your restaurant are overworked. Effective immediately, their hourly wage is tripled. Full medical benefits. If I hear of you yelling at a server for spilling water again, you answer to me." Richard gulped. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am." "Good. Now let's talk about the Mediterranean expansion." Later that evening, Sarah and Dominic visited Mount Sinai. But they weren't in the waiting room. They were in a private VIP suite. Lily was sitting up in bed, bandage around her head, playing a video game. Pink. Healthy. Alive. "Hey, sis." Lily grinned. "Dominic brought me the new console." Dominic smiled. "She beat me 3 times already. I think I'll stick to shipping." Sarah hugged her sister, burying her face in her shoulder. The experimental surgery had been a success. Lily was going to live. Outside, in the cool New York air, Dominic wrapped his arm around Sarah's waist. "You saved him," Sarah whispered. "No," Dominic said. "We saved each other." They got into the limousine. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked. "To Italy. Our mother is waiting. She wants to see the wedding dress." "Which one?" "Julia's," Dominic said softly. "Maria fixed it up. It fits you perfectly." Sarah rested her head on his shoulder. She thought about the journey. From spilled water to a fire ring. From the cliffs of Italy to the boardroom. The waitress and the billionaire. The orphan and the heir. It turned out the old Italian proverb was right. Il sol non dimentica mai la luna. The sun never forgets the moon. They were different. Worlds apart. But they belonged in the same sky. "Ready to go home?" Dominic asked, kissing the top of her head. Sarah smiled, looking at the city lights blurring past. "I'm already there." And that's how a spilled glass of water changed the fate of an empire. Sarah didn't just find a fortune. She found a family, a past, and a future she never dared to dream of. Dominic learned that blood doesn't make a king. Character does. From the humble streets of Queens to the golden cliffs of Tuscany, they proved that sometimes the biggest accidents lead to the most beautiful destinations. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button. It really helps us keep bringing you these incredible stories. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss the next one. What would you do if you found out you were a secret heir? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.